Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel session. Tapi before we start, let's do a quick temperature check. Selamat pagi, cikgu. Tak dengar. Kurang memberangsangkan. Selamat pagi, cikgu. Semua dah makan? Cukup makan? Okey. Cikgu semua berminat tak untuk apply untuk mendapatkan dana dari badan korporat? Berminat. Okay. So this session is almost like soalan bocor untuk memohon dana. If you want to apply for funding from corporates, we need to understand what is the changing landscape of funding. How do corporates as well as foundations and organizations think about funding? And then that will help you structure how you will engage with our esteemed panelists in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the panelists to the session. We have very experienced individuals who bring a lot of experience both locally as well as internationally, and will be able to give us some very good insights into the changing landscape of philanthropic spending. Now, just to set the context, in Malaysia, we are blessed because education is really at the top of everyone's minds. In terms of funding, the government has allocated about 66.2 billion for education next year, and that is about a 2 billion increase from 2025. Similarly, in the corporate space or in foundations and organizations, education is the sector that most organizations are involved in. So there is significant amount of funding that is channeled towards education. And so for today, our conversation and the overarching conversation or question for today is, given the amount of resources that is channeled towards education, how do we ensure that the funding, the resources, as well as investments in education deliver the highest possible social returns? So let's maybe just start with a question for all of you. You can take turns to answer, maybe starting from Kim, moving towards Nelly. What does meaningful social impact in education mean to you?
I'll use yours. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. If I may, I just wanted to first begin by saying I've worked in government partnerships for 10 years, but before that, I was a teacher, not a very good one. I only made it 2 years in the classroom. So I just wanted to say I have the utmost respect and admiration for what you all are doing. So, thank you. And then to answer your question, for me, social impact means building inclusive, sustainable ecosystems for change, and in particular, really focusing and investing in the human capacity and the leadership development of those on the front lines of education, teachers, school leaders, and those who are really propelling those local ecosystems forward with their own innovations. At Teach for All, we invest in something that we call collective leadership. And what we mean by that is leadership from all levels of a system, from students to teachers to school leaders to policymakers and those in the circles surrounding children and their families. And so for me, that's what effective social impact looks like.
Thank you. Eunice?
Hi. So I think for me, it's a great question because I think it's something that I think about a lot. I have two beautiful, very young children, and education obviously is going to be a big part, right, of their lives. So for me, I think it means to really ensure how to create a system where we continue to drive curiosity and also the confidence to stay ahead. We all know that the world is changing so quickly. You know, how do we create us, and sometimes maybe what we've put into the system, it's fast changing. The world has changed before the system can actually keep up with it. So how do we build the right fundamentals to make sure that the children, the education system equips them with the right tools to really drive that long-term impact?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm not in the education space. I'm from Bintang Capital, so we are impact investors. We invest in private companies that drive positive change in the societies and communities they operate in. So for me, I think very shortly, social impact in education to me means education that's accessible, that has quality, and ultimately builds a society that's more resilient and cohesive.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. Can I say ditto to all the answers that they have provided? But practically, I mean, that's what social impact is to me as well. It's about creating results from activities that are done with the communities of the education ecosystem here. And when we talk about the impact that is created, it has to be positive results that can be for long term. It's not a one-off short-term results that we want to bring in, but long-term impact to the community that we work with.
Great, thank you. We've heard a lot about, I mean, some of the words that we've heard are things like long-term, changes in human capital, strategic changes. And I think the challenge in education is that there are a lot of lagging indicators. If we want to see improvements in quality or we want to see improvements in performance, a lot of those are lagging indicators. And so the question to Joseph, to start us off, as someone who manages impact investing portfolios, how do you as an investor measure your returns when it comes to social impact, specifically education?
Right, thanks for the question. That's a very good question. And also a very tough one to answer, basically for the reasons you mentioned earlier. But for us as an impact investor, generally, what we do, or the key thing about impact investing is basically intentionality, right? So the intentionality to invest, to generate positive returns for either social or environmental outcomes, alongside financial returns. So for us, there's still a bit about financial returns that we need to meet. So when we look at an investment on the onset, the keyword intentionality, right? We do use a framework called the theory of change for every investment we make, where the outcomes and the impact are determined at the onset of the investment. So it's not an afterthought that we go in and then we think, okay, what can we generate from this investment? We look at an investment and we think, okay, this is what we want to achieve at the end of our holding period, of generally maybe 7 to 10 years. So that could mean looking at two things: qualitative aspects and so quantitative aspects. So quantitative, I think, is relatively easier to measure, things like the most obvious one being test scores, and then things like employability, post-education, whether the job you ultimately secure, is it related to your field of study, income growth over time, post-graduation or post-education. Then comes the hard bit, right? The qualitative aspect of things, like how has your life or how has your situation improved, be it in your familial relationships, with peers, with colleagues. How has education built your confidence when you go out and look for jobs, opportunities, or maybe even things like, because of the education you received, do you feel that you are an advocate now to pass that knowledge on to the next generation of people? So these qualitative things require a lot of long-term tracking. It has to be on the ground. You have to interview the recipients or the students to actually attribute the change that you've made in their lives, right? So for us, then we combine the quantitative and the qualitative aspects and hopefully tell a very meaningful story that will then inspire people to invest in these ventures. So at Bintang, generally we try to produce case studies for the companies that we invest in. The most recent case study we did was for an elderly care home, Care Concierge. It's available on our website. Sorry, marketing plug. That's generally, but as an example of how we do track social ROI over time and how we share that message with the wider community. Yeah.
Thanks, and thanks for bringing up the theory of change. I believe that is a framework that majority of funders are moving towards in Malaysia, to anchor programs on a theory of change that clearly outlines what's the vision of the program, what are the outcomes that we want to achieve, and how does that link with the activities as well as the output of the program. And I think that's a great segue to bring Puan Nelly into the conversation. Puan Nelly, Yayasan Petronas has run some very long-term programs, built a pretty robust theory of change to chart the way forward as well as the aspirations of the program. So would you like to maybe share with us how Yayasan Petronas has evolved from funding programs to really driving system-wide impact in a very structured manner?
Thank you, Shen. So it's very much the theory of change that we have adopted, where we refine, we relook at our mission, our objective, refine the goals that we want to make sure that we have specific target that we want to achieve. And with that, we also relooked at how do we bring in results that are going to be sustainable. On our side as a funder, the organization requires us to put in the right resources, ensure that we have the right resources, capacity-wise, capability-wise, to be able to drive the change that we want to take up. And it has to be able to bring in measurable impact. And when we talk about measurable impact, it has to align not just to our organizational values, but also to the national priorities. But I must say that getting or starting any program is perhaps I don't know whether it's the right word to say, the easiest way, the easiest thing to do. It's the easiest thing to do. There are plenty of spaces that all of us will be able to look at, but to us, being able to create that lasting positive impact and therefore being prepared to be able to exit and or close the program in a way that will allow for the positive results or positive impact to be sustainable, that is actually the hardest part. Yeah. You mentioned about the long-term program that we have. So the program Duta Guru that we have at the moment, it's a 10-year program. We started it in 2019, pushed a little bit because of COVID, and it's going to end in 2030. We started the recruitment for teachers back in 2019. Everybody will go through a 2-year development program. And we are now into recruiting cohort 7. We just had cohort 5 graduating a couple of weeks ago. We are recruiting cohort 7. We started with 100 plus teachers, and now we are recruiting cohort 5 and cohort 6 have about 400 plus teachers. We are looking at 800 teachers for the coming cohort, hoping to be able to really scale the impact that's created through the program, and to allow all the Duta Guru, the ones who have completed the program, to be able to share whatever best practices that they have out there with the other teachers, and to be able to impact the changes in a much more effective and lasting manner.
Thanks, Puan Nelly. 10-year program is really something that's pretty ambitious, and to be able to commit to do something for that long and with that number of teachers, that's very, very impressive. So congratulations, Yayasan Petronas.
4,500 teachers.
4,500 teachers,
to be
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Eunice and Kim, after hearing some examples from Yayasan Petronas about how Puan Nelly and team are strategically approaching philanthropy in Malaysia, can you maybe share with us some examples of what you're seeing in your work across the region and globally that we can maybe adopt back home?
So for us, I think, so TDCX, we have a TDCX Foundation, which is basically the arm where we do a lot of strategic grant giving, right? And I think I'm going to talk from that lens. So for us, we've also kind of evolved in our own journey. I think when we started, there was a lot of emphasis on making sure that we fund programs that already were tried and tested, because as a corporate, as a foundation, we still obviously have to be answerable to stakeholders and things like that. So, and it gives it a lot more certainty when we are able to show like, hey, this is exactly where the money goes, this is the impact and things like that. But of course, over time, we did take a pause and say like, how does this really gel with the end goal that we want? Of course, it's still very impactful, but if we took a step back, I think that's where we also talk about like a mindset shift, right? And that was our mindset shift where we realized that, hey, you know what, we're not really experts in this space. We need to, I guess, focus back, right, on where where our strengths are. And obviously we not just bring the funds, but we have a lot of like commercial expertise. We have a lot of like, how do you scale? You know, how do you make it something viable for the long term? And I think that's where we took a relook at our efforts and say like, okay, let's really look at it from impact funding kind of perspective. So I think that's kind of how we've evolved our approach to philanthropy. And I think this is also similar to how we're seeing a lot of other foundations, you know, in Singapore, also kind of like moving towards. And yeah, so I think that's really how we're like, okay, let's play to our strengths and, you know, provide what we can. And obviously, there is still an end goal. There's still deliverables that we need to work on. But I think it's very much a shared vision, very outcome-driven. And, you know, let's come in when we, you know, ask the questions, find out, you know, what we can value add where we can. But largely, you know, you guys, like in the education space, are the experts. And, you know, we'll definitely leave it to, you know, the people to do that.
I'll try and bring a little bit of the global trends that we've seen at Teach for All to add to the comments that have already been shared. I think one of the biggest shifts we've seen in how funders are giving right now globally, Teach for All works across 60 plus countries around the world, including Teach for Malaysia here. We've seen a shift from time-bound technical interventions. 10 years is a very generous timeline, and so that's wonderful to hear. Typically, we've worked with 3 to 5 year timelines, even shorter sometimes. And we have seen a shift from those technical interventions with global solutions that are imposed on local communities towards a shift, I would say, towards investing more in communities and the local leaders within those communities to see more of the, what we call locally led, globally informed solutions emerge organically. And just to give an example, during the pandemic, as we all know, when schools closed and kids were out of learning, we saw many global efforts leave overnight in the most vulnerable communities around the world. And one of the things that we saw in that vacuum that was created was the emergence of local leaders bringing really innovative grassroots solutions all across countries. And those are the solutions that I think really are the most sustainable over time. And I think in that moment we learned two things, just to double click on my point. I think one, investing in the capacity development and the leadership of people closest to the challenges that we are trying to address will often yield the best and most sustainable results because they reflect the local needs, the culture, the customs of the communities they serve. And then two, I think instead of imposing global solutions onto local communities, we should expose local communities and local leaders to what we know is working globally so that they can be inspired and create more of those kind of locally led, globally informed solutions that I was talking about.
Great, thanks. I think something that you mentioned about bringing the impact closer or the support closer to the individuals who are actually making a difference makes a lot of sense, and that ensures sustainability of an intervention or funding because those individuals would, number one, understand the context better than we do and are able to then continue to impact the communities moving forward. I think what you mentioned does remind me a little bit about Program Duta Guru, so I'm going to send a question back to Puan Nelly. After hearing some examples that Kim has put forward, I understand that Program Duta Guru is designed to support teachers because you believe teachers are closest to the students and have the power to change their schools and their communities. Can you talk us through a little bit about how you support teachers and how do you ensure that those teachers are then equipped with the necessary resources to then go on and support their schools?
Thank you, Shen. So the 2-year programs for the Duta Guru is not where, I mean, who are we? What do we know about teaching teachers how to teach? It's not by us. The whole program is actually co-designed with the Ministry of Education involving the teachers. And it's by the teachers for the teachers. And upon completion of the program, how we continue to support the teachers is actually to provide them with a little extra support, a little bit of funding to allow the teachers to be able to run STEM-related projects in their schools, or to create spaces, platforms for students to be able to harness their creativity, to unleash their potential, and through the likes of the Maker Studio, or what we call as the Students Innovation Center. And we also provide various other fundings for schools to be able to for us to be able to help schools close the gap that they have. But yes, the funding is there, ensuring that the teachers are going to be able to justify what it is that they're going to be doing and how they're going to be impacting students. Because whatever it is that the schools are going to be doing, what we want to see is the kemenjadian murid, students' outcome. How does it impact the student? How does it bring change to what's gonna, how do we actually unleash the potential of every students? So there are various other supports that we provide. Then again, ensuring that it will sustain or it will provide that continuity to the positive impact and students' outcome is what we will be looking for. And I must say here that although we do have the capacity to help schools, a little bit of a promotion, we will only prioritize helps for schools that have duta guru.
Okay, so cikgu-cikgu yang berminat untuk mendapat dana tu registerlah for Duta Guru, right? So you are able to then tap in the funding that's available. And I know when Panellists says little funding, it's good amount of funding for schools, and it's enough to make change in your schools. I also like the point that you're bringing up where there is a program and that you're also investing beyond the program. So while you are supporting teachers, you're also providing funding for them to go on and execute what is required in their schools. And that's really amazing. To really be able to make systemic change, all our funding will end eventually, funding for projects, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, maybe 10 years, eventually that funding will end. And in order to make system-level change, we need to ensure that the benefits or the products of our investments carry on in the systems beyond our funding cycle. We want to avoid unsustainable one-off projects that kind of disappear once funding stops. So, Nelly, back to you still. What steps has Yayasan Petronas taken to ensure the sustainability and the longevity of your programs?
We don't do it just with the teachers. The whole program is actually done together with the Ministry of Education, and it involves the various sectors in the ministry. The design, how we approach what we're going to be doing with the teachers, it's all done together with the experts from the Ministry of Education. And what we hope to be able to do, again, through the voices of the teachers who are involved, is to allow that whatever positive changes that they have brought in, the teachers have brought in, it's going to become the standard practice. Yeah, it's going to be part of the system, the systemic change that would allow that effectiveness to be sustained, that positive impact to be sustained, and that's how we hope to be able to scale it up across the education system in Malaysia.
Okay, great. Kim, from your work with Teach for All globally, what lessons can Malaysia learn about aligning philanthropic funding with kind of government systems to achieve lasting change?
Good question. I think in education circles, particularly, we love to talk about the practice and policy divide. How do we inform the work of government from learning directly from teachers and schools about what works? I think there is a key role for philanthropy to play in bridging that divide by establishing stronger pathways for communication, collaboration, and knowledge sharing between and among education actors in a system. I think currently, as many of us have probably seen, our sector in education is very siloed, right? So we have researchers, we have teachers and teacher trainers, we have policymakers. So instead, imagine a sector where there is constant feedback and iteration, where the latest research and insights about what's working and what's not working can be shared transparently and quickly among actors in the system. So policy and practice are more responsive to the needs of government, but also to the needs of teachers and students. I do think the building blocks of this structure exists already. We see it in local networks of educators and school leaders. And those networks can easily tap into the collective wisdom of their cohorts to help inform and support government priorities as well as the priorities of philanthropists. However, I do think we place so much emphasis on finding the right solution as opposed to creating an ecosystem where lots of diverse solutions are flourishing and are readily available to all.
Can you maybe give us an example of maybe a successful project or a successful approach that you've seen work?
So I do think, I'll use the example of today.
Okay,
right?
sure.
Like we are all here together. When I look out in the crowd, I see lots of teachers, I see students, I see school leaders, I see policymakers, and I see philanthropists. And I think part of this structure you can't see, right? It's like the invisible roads and superhighways that we hope innovations can travel upon if we strengthen those pathways. But it's also being in person to connect and build the trust and the relationships that you need to be able to implement those type of sustainable, impactful programs we're talking about.
Great, thanks. And I guess that's an endorsement for the wonderful work that Sam and team are doing at Pemimpin. So well done. When we talk about system change, at times we focus very much on policy change or embedding practices into the existing processes. But system change is way more than just changing practices, changing processes. It is also about changing the hearts and minds of those who are involved in the process, whether it's a mindset change or a behavior change. That really is where the heart of system change is. And so, Eunice, you're definitely a communications expert and have really worked in this space significantly. So what role does communications and storytelling have in transforming behaviors, beliefs, and practices towards kind of sustainable system change?
So I think communications, as we all know, is really something that we do every day, right? We're here, we're communicating to one another. I think the question comes, how do you ensure that the information you're trying to get across sticks? You know, how do you make sure that you're preparing it for the right audience, to the right platforms, the right mediums? Every part of that communication spectrum actually plays a role in helping you to deliver that message effectively. And I think when we do it well, communications is not just a messenger tool. It really can help you to catalyze your efforts, right? And I think that is something, the starting point almost from where we should be thinking about it. And I think storytelling is, a word that, we've probably all heard about a lot before because it really is what works, right? The most things we remember, I think it's probably told to us through a storytelling kind of like approach. And I think this is the same everywhere, even for corporate, right? When we think about how do I pitch something to my management, it's the same thing. How do I make it resonate with them and do it in the right way as well? And I think one way that I tend to think about it is to put it through this framework that I call the CLEAR framework. So I think it should be consistent. You need to have listened to what your target audience or the group that you're talking to is truly at the heart of what truly matters to them. It has to be engaging. It has to be authentic. I think authenticity, the value of that cannot be underestimated. I think often when we get into we're so, eager to share what we want to say and to pattern all the numbers and all the bells and whistles that sometimes you forget that, hey, actually what is the core of what we're trying to get across. And I think that is really, a very important guiding principle to have in the way you communicate. And last but not least, obviously, I think it has to be relevant. We all have different perspectives, and obviously it's not to overly veer towards one or another, but how do we promote, how do we get to a point where there's commonality, which is something that we all have. And in this room, for sure, we're all super passionate about education, right? And whoever you're trying to talk to, I'm sure would have that as a baseline as well. So I think that's one way that we, to think about communications.
Great, thanks. And given that being able to change the hearts and minds of individuals is really at the heart of system change, I think communication isn't just it's a byproduct of what we do, but it is really crucial to be part and parcel of how we plan our programs and really embed it into the way we work. So thanks for that. And I think when we also talk about system change beyond kind of catalyzing existing programs that work, I think in Malaysia, from observation, we tend to like to fund programs that have a proven track record, that have the data to back that it works. But if you wanted to take a quantum leap or make a quantum leap, more funding needs to then go into more experimental projects that have the potential to accelerate improvements, even though it's probably not in a tested space. And so, Joseph, since you do manage investments, I would like to ask you, what can we do to encourage funders, both locally and globally, to take on a bit more risks and begin allocating funding for more experimental efforts that may be, more high risk, but also high return?
Hello. Sorry, yeah, that's a very interesting question. Essentially, investors, they want to do two things, right? They want high returns and at the lowest risk possible. So maybe a different way to think about it is how do we attract investors to fund education programs, which can generate returns either financially or socially and environmentally, without taking excessive risk. I think so for us at Bintang, most of our investors are actually commercial investors. They do expect a commercial return, something that is a bit higher than the FD rates that you can get at the bank. So a lot of the companies that invest in generally, other than doing good, they are also financially sustainable in the long term. But I think a way to look at maybe investments in education, we have to think about education as something that it can be quite a lucrative industry, especially, I'm sure you guys have heard, there are lots of investments from PE into higher education institutions. But other than that, I think education is also a way for investors to improve the overall performance of the portfolio, because with good education, it does, to borrow the Madani government word, raise the floor and raises the ceiling. You do build a workforce that is more efficient, that is more cohesive, that's more resilient, and that, in a way, reduces the risks of your other investments or makes your investments in other areas perform better. Right. So, for instance, education, I think one of the ways that people do it could be blended financing. So blended financing essentially is combining different types of capital. It could be philanthropic capital, government funding, to crowd in then private investors, right? So different investors with different risk profiles coming in to invest in a common cause that would otherwise not attract private capital. So I think an example could be in an outcomes kind of funding, right? So outcomes funding means you only pay for the outcome. And the payer here could be the government or philanthropic capital. So they will pay for certain outcomes that they want to achieve. So for example, if you want to increase school completion rates in a rural area, right? So you start with an outcome in mind, and then the private capital would fund it first. So they will come in and say, okay, we will run this program, we will fund this program to have 3 goals, right? Maybe you want to ensure all the students or 80% of the students that enroll in the school complete their secondary education after 5 years. And then the second goal could be, after they complete their education, they find jobs or they move on to higher education, right? And third, maybe having a passing rate for SPM after they finish Form 5. So each of these outcomes will then be tied to a return that they get from the government funding or philanthropic capital. So if they achieve one goal, maybe they get like 4% return on top of their capital. 2 goals, 6%, and 3 goals, 8%, which is generally what private investors expect. So that combination of public and private funding would then essentially eliminate the risk of non-performance on the government capital or philanthropic capital. The investors or the managers are highly motivated to achieve the goals. If not, they won't get their money back. And thirdly, it also ensures that, for whatever outcomes you want to achieve, or for example, for this case, it ensures that you do provide quality education to the rural areas or to the communities that you want to serve. So that could be an example, right? We will go one step further and say, like, I realized recently as well that there's a SST being imposed on private education fees, right? So that could be a pool of capital that is utilized for an outcomes bond. Just throwing an idea out there. Yeah.
Perfect. Kim, Eunice, do you see any change in how philanthropic funding is shifting globally from maybe more tried and tested programs moving towards more experimental programs?
Can you hear me? Okay, good. I think I have seen a shift in not just, let me say, how philanthropy is done. And I think some of us have talked about that on the panel. I think I've seen a shift towards global philanthropists really being humble in their role, trying to move beyond the traditional power structures that dictate kind of the traditional funder-fundee relationship, and really starting with a commitment to listening to the stories and the experiences of the people and the communities they're trying to help. As I've spoken before, I think that's one of the most important things, and really investing in the leadership of those folks. And so I do think that's something that a lot of people have said that they want to do, but now I think you see more people actually doing it, which is exciting.
That's good.
I mean, that's definitely true, right? I think, as I mentioned also, the way in which we view and the way we, evaluate the initiatives has matured or evolved in that sense. But I think not just in the selection, but in the review, I think that has also really changed, right, for us in terms of our impact funds. So from time to time, especially when you support something that's so in quite an early stage, they're still kind of like figuring out as they go, because obviously you have to start somewhere. We also see obviously sometimes in our monitoring that, hey, maybe certain indicators don't look quite good. We start to see, not red flags, but maybe some amber flags start to come out. And I think that has also required us to be like, okay, let's, are we still tracking on the overall goal? Are we, is this big enough of an issue? How are they mitigating it? What are the, ways in which, like, what happened and how is it being changed and all that kind of stuff. So I think it has also changed the way we think about it, where, like, in the past, maybe you have been a bit more like, do we start to think about how we exit, or, is it really, because obviously we also have to be, I guess the accountability of the funds and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think that's really where things have also changed, where it's not like, all right, it's really a journey, it's an iterative process, and we're in that journey together with the organizations as well.
Great, thanks. It's encouraging to hear that there is definitely a shift, and I think that gives a lot more space also for people to be innovative, for teachers to come up with great ideas. Maybe it's not tried, maybe it's not tested, but good ideas that can potentially really supercharge the education space. So that's really good and encouraging to hear. We've talked a lot about funding, we've talked a lot about how do we make our money work smarter, work harder, and to maximize the returns of investment. But I think on this stage, we represent 4 very large and significant companies and organizations. And there's more that corporates and organizations can bring to the table aside from funding, because funding at the end of the day is limited. So this is an open question to all of you. Beyond funding, what additional value can your organization bring to the table to help drive social impact in the education space? It's open to all, which means all have to answer. So don't rush.
Okay, Shen, I told you, Shen, I didn't like that question. But yes, beyond funding, I must say Petronas and Yayasan Petronas, we totally believe in education. I myself, I believe education is the fastest way to change the course of life for a family, for a community. It's not a short-term thing. There's a long gestation period for you to be able to see the impact. So it is patient investment. You have to be patient to be able to see the results. So beyond funding, we also bring in our own resources. The range of resources or staff that we have in the organization who also believe in education have been volunteers to go down and to schools, work with us, contribute their expertise in the industry so that we'll be able to impart our knowledge to the education ecosystem, to the teachers, and especially to the students. For our Duta Guru, we bring them to join, to attend international conferences like the Energy Asia, the OPITA conference, so that the teachers will be exposed to what's going on in the actual industry. What do they talk about? What problems are they facing? What are the technological issues? What are the new findings, the inventions that are out there? So that the teachers will be able to impart that and share that with the students. We also brought some of the students to actually attend some of these side conferences, again, for them to be able to be exposed to what's going on in the industry. And we do have resources across the organization also that we bring in, where we bring in the teachers to be able to see what we have in our own organization. Our university, our leadership center, our technical training institute, so that, again, they'll be exposed to what it is and how we run the organization, also build the capabilities of the resources of the people that we have in the organization. So the people in the organization are also what we bring in as part of how we work with the teachers beyond funding.
Thank you, Panelli.
I can add to that from the, I guess, corporate perspective. So for us, TDCX, we work with a lot of like global brands, and a lot of these are companies with very innovative business models, and actually, some are at different levels, or I guess different business stages, right? Even from super early stage where, they're really charting a new industry of their own. So for us, I think when we work with all the partners, we really also help to bring in that more commercial lens. So obviously in the area of education, right, where, it's also something that we eventually need. We need that talent pipeline. We need the talent to have the skills that we're after to ensure the continuity of the industry and the development of it. So I think that's where, apart from funding and obviously our people sharing technical expertise and things like that, but through all the conversations and all the things we're seeing with our clients, that's really a very practical and realistic lens into what the jobs of the future look like, right? I mean, we heard of things like, there's vibe coders now, we are training LLMs and things like that. So how do we make sure that, the talent of the future have that understanding and that readiness to, be part of that corporate landscape or whatever jobs they may wish to undertake in a future that, may not be so clear at this stage?
I think what I can talk about in terms of being a global network, global organization, is I spoke earlier in my remarks about the power of local networks. And so our local partner, Teach for Malaysia here, is a conduit to a much larger global network. As I mentioned, we're across 60 countries. We have over 10,000 teachers in classrooms. We have over 90,000 alumni working at all levels of education systems as veteran teachers, as school leaders, as policymakers, as folks working all around that ecosystem surrounding children's well-being and education. And so I do think one of the things that the Teach for All network and other similar networks can offer, like Global School Leaders, for example, is access to those kind of the global knowledge that I was talking about before that can really help spark local innovations that I think are really important.
Yeah, I'd like to correct you. We are not, Bintang is actually a very small company. We are not a huge organization. We are a team of 12 people now. And yeah, I guess beyond funding our portfolio companies, we do try in whatever small way we can give back to the community and the people. One way we do it is through our internship programs. So we do run an annual internship program where we actually reserve 50% of the placements for kids from underprivileged backgrounds. And for these reserved places, we actually do pay them an allowance that's double the normal internship allowance that we pay the other interns. So throughout the internship program, actually, it is a very, very structured internship program that we run. We typically invite, over the 8 weeks that they are with us, prominent people from the regulatory space, business space, even ex-government servants, and also alumni from the Bintang Capital team to come in and share their life story on how they have journeyed through their careers from university, any challenges they face, how they've overcome it, and what made them into who they are today. And hopefully that inspires the interns that come on board with us to pursue their own journey after graduation. So I think that has actually helped a lot of the interns that come through us. And we also do have regular classes or workshops with them, really to introduce them to the world of investments, what we do, how we create value for our portfolio companies. The other thing that we do, I guess, in beyond funding, for analysts that we onboard as on our team, we do second them to our portfolio companies. So we place them in portfolio companies that we invest in for a period of about 1 year. And in that 1 year, they are basically our ambassadors to create value and to create impact in the company. So what they would do typically, they would set up proper governance frameworks, how to measure their impact, how to measure their outcomes, so that once that is in place over the time that we're holding or that we're invested in the company, hopefully that becomes a framework that they can use to report and to track the impact they are creating ultimately in the longer term. So that's kind of, I guess, the work we do beyond funding.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit. I didn't mention it just now, just for clarity. When we bring in our engineers, share about what they go through, their career to the schools, it inspires a lot of students. But I also must mention that we, beyond funding, so Duta Guru schools, there are 100 schools that has Duta Guru, a little bit of promotion for Duta Guru again, that we have supported to actually refurbish their science labs. Because there are a lot of science labs that do not have enough equipment. So we help refurbish these 100 schools. But beyond that funding, we brought our researchers from our Petronas Research Center, who are also involved, among others, in developing the products, the oil that support the F1 cars, to actually train the lab assistants for all the science labs for these 100 schools so that they'll be able to utilize the equipments in the science lab and be able to do what they can to maintain the equipments in the science lab. The development programs, the 2 years development programs that we do, there a lot of the sessions that are done is actually not new things for the teachers. They have gone through project-based learning in their own teachers development program. But what we bring in is the opportunity for them to be able to do hands-on exercise, hands-on projects. And this is also where we bring our engineers to share how they run projects in Petronas. So expertise sharing in running actual projects out there in the hope that the teachers will be able to inspire students as problem solvers of the future to be able to look into these problems and solve the problems for us in the future.
Right, thank you. Those are all fantastic examples. And teachers, you've heard of how companies can really support schools and teachers in more ways than just funding. So over the next 2 days, as you meet all the different corporate representatives and organizations, don't just think about asking for money, don't just think about asking for funding for your projects, but think a bit about how can you partner with corporations, how can you partner with organizations to leverage the expertise and the resources that they have beyond funding to improve and impact your schools. I think we have time actually for 1 or 2 questions from the floor. So I would like to open this to the floor. If there's anyone who has a question. Okay, how do we do this? There are no mics. Just maybe stand up and raise your hand and someone will approach you with a mic. State where you're from and then your question. Any questions from the floor? Okay, one question up front. Cikgu, maybe you can stand and the mic's coming towards you.
Hi, Gloria from University of Malaysia. I'm coming from the perspective of someone who has never been to a Malaysian university event. So let's talk about scale. There's about 10,000 schools in Malaysia, primary and secondary. Yayasan Petronas just now mentioned we have touched about 100 schools via the program Bintang. So how can we access greater, give more opportunities to greater number of schools out there? Since at the start of the session we were asked to dream, so is there a clearing space that we can build for us to interact with one another? Because I'm assuming, probably from the point of ignorance, that there might be a gap in between. How do teachers on the ground access expertise, funding from both resources out there, so open to all panelists. I'm not sure if the question is clear.
I guess I'll answer first. So the schools that we have been working with is not 100. We actually have Duta Guru in more than 1,000 schools in Malaysia by now. Because when we first started, our aim was to make sure that every daerah, every district is represented, and by now we have covered all daerah in Malaysia. From the last graduation of for cohort 5, we actually have 1,434 teachers in the Duta Guru program, and we have 400 plus more who's going to be graduating next year, and 800 who are going to be coming in as cohort 7 that are being recruited at the moment. Again, our target is 4,500, just 10% of the teachers' population, 450,000 across Malaysia. But we hope that these teachers are going to be, that's why they call Duta Guru. They are going to be the ones who are going to spread and share the skills across to the other teachers in Malaysia. And along that, it's also the systemic change that we hope will be embedded in the education ecosystem via the relationship and the collaboration that we have with the Ministry of Education. And how do you access? So program Duta Guru is open to teachers. We don't select them, they apply. They apply to join the program. So please do apply so that you'll have the opportunity to access the support that we'll be able to provide.
Thanks. And the question on scale is definitely a very important question to make sure that all schools are supported, regardless of where the schools are. Are there any other maybe global perspectives that we can bring in?
I think one thing I would offer that I have seen work in other contexts around the world where Teach for All works, I'll use one example from Chile, Enseña Chile. They started a radio education program to reach remote learners during the pandemic. And it was started by one teacher who heard that another school was doing this in Nigeria from an internal newsletter. Thought, let me try to do this with some other teachers in my school. Wrote, with no experience, a 30-minute lesson plan that they recorded on a phone into a podcast. And they went to their local mayors and they went to their local radio stations, this very small circle of partners, to say, can you help me? And they started just broadcasting, and they got feedback, they iterated, they kept sharing it out. And I love this example because it's such a small innovation, but it really did have large systemic impact. In 1 month, they managed to get over 90 teachers co-developing this content across 240 frequencies, private radio stations that broadcast around the entire country. And the World Bank, later after the pandemic, approached them and said, can we make this into a case study? Because we think what we've learned from your very small village in Chile actually has huge implications for other communities around the world with limited connectivity and access to digital devices. So my advice would be, start small over and over again, reach out to your immediate circle, and have a sense of possibility. I know that's hard, right? Because it's asking you to be positive every day, but I do think that's one way you can approach it.
Thanks. I think we have time for one last question, if there's anyone else who would like to ask the panel a question. Over here. Sorry, can I clarify the question again? How do you measure the narrow? Okay, okay.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think from our point of view, impact is something that happens over a very, very long term. It is not immediately measurable, unlike things like test scores or income or employability. So I guess to your question, it would require tracking over a long period of time, 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, and these will be very qualitative kind of questions which they will then need to answer. You have to be on the ground to actually measure the impact. It can't just be a general statement to say, oh yeah, because we have set up a school, income levels have risen, right? But it has to be attributable to, I guess in our case at least, the impact you create has to be attributable to the capital you put in, right? You must be able to connect both dots. So we are still very young company. We have been around only since 2018. But yeah, I think in our theory of change, in our impact measurement system, there is in place something to measure the qualitative impact post-investment or even during our investments over a very long period of time. And then combining that with the outcomes or the outputs, which is the numbers that we calculated or that we collect, and then combining those to tell a story on the impact they've created.
Yes, adding to that also, I think it's also, I guess one of the fundamentals is to look at, the types of, corporates or foundations that you're trying to engage with. I think there's a whole spectrum as well. I mean, I think, for like there's very big corporate level ones, and for TDCX, yes, we're a corporate also, but if like, our company is not that old, so it's still founder-led, founder-driven. So at the foundation level, honestly, the main person I have to answer to is my founder. So that really shortens the decision-making process, plus the like kind of I guess the considerations also. So we have a lot more leeway. So I think if and I'm sure there are a whole spectrum of different types of foundations out there, right? So if you look at the types that the setup, plus also what they are focused on. Like for us, we have education, economic empowerment, and environment. So we're very open to, I guess, talking to different organizations that want to kind of like have a goal or a vision they want to, even like I said, very early stage. It may not be concrete yet, but because I think of the way we're set up, we have that flexibility to look at it like from a different lens. So I think that fit has to be right also, yeah.
Great, and to wrap up, we've spoken a lot about investing and funding strategic initiatives, ensuring system change. So if you had $10 million, and we'll start maybe with Kim and work our way down to Puan Nelly. If you had $10 million today, unrestricted funding, no need to report to board, no need to fill up risk matrix, to be invested in education right now, what would you invest the $10 million in?
This is such a fun question. So I think the theme of this summit, and I wrote it down so I don't get it wrong, a step together to shape the future. And I actually think we should take that idea, that statement, seriously, because I think if I had a lot of money, I would make a really big bet. And I think one of the things that I would bet on is taking on this task of reshaping our older, outdated education systems, the purposes and practices within them, towards equipping students with the competencies we know they will need in the future. I mean the collaboration, the empathy, the creativity, the resilience. And I think these are the things we know young people will need to navigate uncertainty. And so when I think about the future, that's what I think about.
Thanks.
Pretty much, I think there's a lot of building blocks in place already right now. I think that a lot have been done to kind of, everyone has that heart to really drive that change. But I think what this money could really do is to let us experiment more, where there's like we can just, let's give it a go. Of course, we still want to be accountable. We still want to make sure that we drive outcomes. But hey, I think we do need a bit more of that room to fail. And I think that's where sometimes we maybe hold ourselves back because we're so worried that, hey, I understand, right? Like organizations, they also, if they want the continued funding, they're like, okay, we need to still show some metrics and stuff like that. But I think if we had money that we could just be brave and be experimental, I think that's what I would use that money for.
Yeah, I think for me, if it's a free 10 million ringgit, no expectation of returns, I think I would invest in all the panelists and all the organizations they represent, and also organizations here, Pemimpin, because you are already doing good work, and funding is never enough, and you really have a program in place. I think that is probably what I would invest in.
$10 million is not going to be enough to do, to do much.
$10 million, so round it up to 40 million.
We do have a little bit more than 10 million. But what we would continue to invest in is to make sure that kemenjadian murid, students' outcome, is going to be real, and all of us will be able to do our utmost best to ensure that every students are going to turn out to be a positively contributing member of society.
Great, and with that, thank you very much to our panelists and to the audience. Thank you for your participation. Thanks.